Hello everyone, my name's Peter, I'm the Dungeon Doctor. Thank you for joining me for this reaction to the latest Unearthed Arcana put out by WotC for the One D&D playtest. I'm looking forward to jumping right into this. You might have some questions about my attire, pyjamas, damp hair, towel behind me, kind of rocking the Arthur Dent look this morning, and that's because it is just gone 6 o'clock here in the United Kingdom, so if you're wondering for my strange attire, that's why. But I'm committed to getting this reaction to the latest playtest material out as soon as possible. So, without any further ado, let's get into it. I'll be pausing the video occasionally just to give my thoughts, but otherwise I'm going to try and make this as smooth a ride through it as we can. So, let's go.
Hello everyone, we have a brand new Unearthed Arcana. We have classes, subclasses, we have feats, conditions, we have new rules having to do with skill checks and attack rolls, as well as how a critical hit functions.
So, sounds like we're going to get an even bigger Unearthed Arcana than the last one, which is very exciting.
Just delve in right now and have an overview of all of that.
This Unearthed Arcana is filled with things I can't wait for people to playtest. We're playing testing them internally here at Wizards, and leading the pack in this playtest for the classes are the Ranger, the Bard, and the Rogue. People are going to see in the next few months all of the classes from the 2014 player.
So, one thing I was a little bit worried about when they said expert classes was the potential reintroduction of prestige classes for D&D, something that was a part of 3.5 edition, maybe 3rd edition as well. And I couldn't be happier to find out that no, it's not about that. I think expert classes is referring to Rogue, Ranger, and Bard, because they are the classes which are very much synonymous with skill checks and being experts in those. And it sounds like they're also playtesting some rules with regards to skill checks as well, so it makes sense that they're releasing that all as one package. So it's interesting. It's an interesting approach to playtesting that they're kind of grouping them in this way. I imagine we'll get groupings for certain magic casters as well. So let's keep going.
Player's Handbook are going to appear in Unearthed Arcana so that people can read them, give feedback, playtest them. Following after that, you're going to see a series of Unearthed Arcanas that also unveil new versions of subclasses, as well as some brand new subclasses for those classes. The total number of subclasses when all is said and done, 48. So we have a lot of fun things ahead of us.
Okay.
Yeah, and probably a quarter of those are going to be just the cleric, because famously they had it was a good 10 or so for each different kind of effectively god that they worship. So yeah. Oh, and also Wizard tended to have quite a lot of subclasses as well. So that number sounds very big, but yeah, the Player's Handbook had quite a lot, and a lot of it was down to a particular few classes, just getting quite a lot more. And those individual subclasses for Wizard and Cleric tended to define the class a little bit less. So, I mean, it's still nice to know that we're getting a healthy number of subclasses and some new ones, which will be good for anyone who's jumping into this new, I'm going to call 5.5 edition.
To try out. But today, we're focused on our friends, the Bard, the Ranger, and the Rogue, along with, as you mentioned, a bunch of feats, because each of these classes, like all of the classes in the game, has the option at certain levels of taking feats, including the new ability score improvement feat, which many fans rightly predicted is what was going to be coming. And sure enough, when you reach any of the levels.
So this is basically changing how ability score improvements are introduced into the game. Now the feat system is what's allowing you to get ability score improvements, which yeah, makes sense, simplifies things. It's not actually a mechanical rule change, it's just a bit of a quality of life change, which, yeah, great, makes a lot of sense. Although I would wonder if the feats were more powerful in general than ability scores, whether they'd, instead of giving a +2 to ability scores, giving you a +3 that you can put in potentially 3 different places. Maybe a bit too powerful. I don't know. Let's keep going though.
Levels that in the past, where you would have gotten the ability score improvement feature, now you have the option of taking the ability score improvement feat, does exactly the same thing as the ability score improvement feature in the 2014 Player's Handbook, or you can take another feat of your choice. If your group is deciding to go beyond the ability score improvement feat and the first level feat that you're getting from your background in the previous Unearthed Arcana. This UA also includes the Arcane, Divine, and Primal spell lists all the way up to level 9, and it includes a rules glossary that is filled with even more treasures than the previous one. And here I want to pause a little bit and talk about how do you use these Unearthed Arcanas together?
Okay, so a few things there. They're releasing full spell list, and that's going to be really interesting because one thing I had a lot of worries about was the sharing of spells between different classes. Thankfully, they're actually going to be telling us how the Bard works in this class, which was the one I was most worried about. If it is grabbing too many spells from the Arcane spell list, because that feels like it would really dilute what the Bard class is about, to kind of reducing it to just a musical version of a wizard or sorcerer. Interested to see what happens with those spell lists.
Because now that we have 2 out as a part of the One D&D playtest, we would love for people to play using material from multiple One D&D Unearthed Arcanas. The one main thing to keep in.
So, before we keep going, I think I am going to do a bit of quality life change and speed us up to 1.25, because as much as it's important to get every word crystal clear on this, I think brevity is also important. And Jeremy Crawford, love him. He tends to over-exposit in these things, tends to say about how much fun they're having during the playtest, and really, we just want to get to those rule changes as quick as possible. So let's go.
Mind as people playtest is that the rules glossary of each UA supersedes the rules glossaries of any previous One D&D UAs. So we'd love for you to take the character origin options from the previous UA, combine them with the classes and feats in this UA, but use only the rules glossary from the new Unearthed Arcana. Because over the course of the next year and a half, we're going to try out different versions of core rules and then see what people think of those different versions.
This is the part of the video that I got to and got really excited because there was so many controversial rule changes in the last playtest material with regards to D20 tests, with regards to critical hits, with regards to inspiration. And here they're outright saying, we're trialing different iterations of that. And that's really good, because that means that a lot of the stuff that we've already been suggesting in our playtest feedback, we're going to see potentially implemented into these playtest rules. And if we're comparing the response to each of these, then that suggests they're going to pick whatever's the most popular with the community. And that's a much better way of going about things, I think, rather than just taking a shot in the dark with one iteration. So say what you want about the playtest material so far and the way they're gathering feedback for it. They're being thorough with this playtest, I think. So yeah, I can't wait to see what these new iterations look like.
great example of this is how we're handling critical hits.
Yes.
So you and I, in our video last time, talked about the fact that the previous Unearthed Arcana had a rule that we knew was very experimental and had a good chance of not being what the community was going to cheer for, but we were interested in seeing what do people think, because there were some angles to that rule that we were fascinated in seeing how can this serve the game. We've already seen some of the responses, and you're going to see this time that for the current version of the playtest, we are using the critical hit rule as it exists in the 2014 player's handbook.
And thank goodness, because that suggests that the rules and playtests going forward can still be compatible with having those critical hits. Oh, thank goodness, because, yeah, DMs everywhere cried out in horror that their monsters weren't going to be getting critical hits. And also, it just seemed like an unnecessary complication to remove that from spellcasters as well. I know Jeremy Crawford said that in Sage Advice he got a lot of questions about spellcasting, getting critical hits. It seemed pretty damn clear to me in most groups I played in, if it's an attack roll, you can get a critical hit, and that was that. Oh well, let's keep going.
Handbook. So, again, make sure, if you're playtesting and everyone else is playtesting, read the new rules glossary, where you'll also see that we are experimenting with different rules this time around for the D20 test. This time we don't have the universal rule of a 20 always succeeding and a 1 always failing. Instead, we are playing around with some other approaches. Although there, you're also going to find a familiar friend in that we're largely using the 2014 version of the rule, with the catch that this time we're testing rolling a 1 on a D20, giving you inspiration.
Yeah.
Yes! I much prefer that iteration, and I think plenty of other commenters on the playtest material also much prefer that too, as well, because people don't need inspiration on top of getting a natural 20, and rewarding players who are consistently rolling really badly, I think that's a lot nicer.
That's interesting.
Because we basically have 3 different modes we are looking at for getting inspiration in play. Last time, we asked everyone to try out getting it when you roll a 20. This time we're asking you to try it out when you roll a 1. We also, in the previous Unearthed Arcana, had another mode in the human of getting inspiration when you finish a long rest. We've actually considered having that as a potential rule for everybody, but right now we want to try out the roll a 1 rule for everybody, and then humans have the special feature of getting it at the end of...
Yeah, I don't think the human needs to have that to be unique to them. Getting a second first level feat is already pretty busted, to be honest, particularly as we get into more and more content in later rule supplementals to this new version of D&D. That ability to get a second first level feat is just going to get more and more powerful as more different iterations become available. So having inspiration on a long rest available to all players seems reasonable. I'm not sure it's strictly necessary. I mean, I've got a special rule for inspiration in my games of Icewind Dale where you only get inspiration on a long rest if you manage to take a rest in nice, comfortable environments, but I don't know, it's not the worst change to make sure everyone starts with an inspiration point on a long rest, so I'm happy with that change.
A long rest. Now, speaking of humans and the other content in the previous Unearthed Arcana, the survey for that UA is still open, and the response has been tremendous. As of today, over 40,000 people have completed the survey. We'll see how many more people have completed it by the time the survey closes next week. We are then going to go into our investigation of what has everyone said about the different options that were in that UA. We will look at all of the satisfaction scores. And then in a future video, you and I will get together and we'll talk about what did people say. And then at a future point in this journey we're on together, we'll present a new version of that Unearthed Arcana incorporating.
Okay, that's a surprise. That is a more transparent approach to responding to the feedback than I gave Crawford and the design team credit for. on this, because if you're putting out there that they're going to say what satisfaction scores were, then that means they're going to be a bit more open to criticism on if they take that feedback on board or not. I applaud it, and I hope that they're going to be as transparent as they're suggesting they are. They're also talking about doing reiterations of that playtest material of those classes, and great. Yeah, the more iterations, the better. You don't go with just your first draft on these things. So, yeah, getting a second draft out there is very, very nice to see.
Rating people's feedback. That's going to be the cycle that we're all in together during this long playtest. Just like we did in D&D Next. We're going to present something.
Yep.
We're going to get the feedback back. We'll analyze it. We'll do a new version incorporating feedback, and then we'll get feedback on that new version until, in a few years' time, the game coalesces into the new core books.
We're also going to have several videos all about this Unearthed Arcana that will go a little bit more in depth. It is important to remember, we have had a record-breaking amount of people download the playtest. We are very excited, and if you're watching this video, please remember, we appreciate all the comments on YouTube and other social networks, but what will really help us in the end is if you download the playtest and then take the survey that comes out and leave your feedback. That is how you help us sculpt the future of D&D together.
Yeah.
And that's fair enough. As great as creator comments are, at the end of the day, they're going to have the best input coming through their survey, and they'll be able to analyze it properly there. So I just had to take a very quick break to see my 5-year-old son on his favourite game, Super Mario Odyssey, but now I can get right back into it. Let's go. Oh, before we go, actually, he was just mentioning that they were still keeping the original playtest material document open. I'm a little bit confused about why they might do that and potentially release the new playtest material at the same time. It feels a bit messy for getting feedback to release new playtest material, which could potentially influence the reactions on that survey that's out. But maybe there won't be that much crossover, or maybe they'll make sure that any feedback taken after the new playtest material and this video have come out is, taken on board, because you don't particularly want to be getting the lines crossed on feedback like that. And I think anything on the survey that comes out, even just after this video, could be potentially a bit warped by those new expectations. So, I don't know, it's not how I do the playtest, but I don't know, maybe they've got checks in place for that. Also, 40,000 responses to the playtest material. That's actually less than I was expecting, because D&D is pretty big internationally. I was expecting it to be closer to the hundreds of thousands, maybe, but oh well. Let's go.
Filling out that survey is the best way to have an impact on where this is heading. Now, in addition to responding to what we see there, we're also going to continue to do experiments. So I mentioned we are dealing with the D20 test and getting inspiration differently this time. That's just simply our design process proceeding. That's not even in response to the feedback yet, because the survey is still open. So people are going to get to see not only new versions of things that we've heard from the community that they would like to see, you're also going to see new versions of things based on our own internal playtesting, and also just different versions of mechanics we want to try out. This is a playtest, and part of that is testing out sometimes multiple versions of things to see which one on its own resonates most for all of us as DMs and players of this game.
And yeah, just going back to earlier comments I made, that is really positive in my view, and a very healthy way to do this playtest. So yeah, no, good job. This is feeling like a good approach.
And then even further, which options sync up well with the other pieces of the game? Because D&D is a game with hundreds, not thousands of moving.
And yeah, that's a good point. You do need to take it as a whole as well. And that is something that was really kind of a bit missing from the previous playtest. And that is you're trying to playtest small elements in isolation from any other changes they make. Like a lot of the races give you spell casting. Well, how do you play test those spell casting rules if you don't know what potential rules are going to be made to some of those really potent things like the shield spell? So yeah, it's always one mechanic is just one cog in the machine, and seeing how those combinations work together as we get into later playtest documents is going to be really important. But they seem cognizant of that, so that is good.
Parts, and we want to make sure that if anything shifts, things are really running together in a way that's going to make people feel in the end, this game is exactly what I want it to be. So this time around, what we're asking people to look at are these classes, which also are framed in a way that is new for the current version of the game.
Let's go ahead and dig into the classes then. So we've got 3 of the classes here, and then we've got subclasses attached. So tell me about what's changed.
Oh, okay, we're getting the subclasses too. We might see how subclasses are changing. Hopefully the past subclasses are still compatible, given that you get subclass levels at particular levels. If they've changed that, then they're really breaking the compatibility rules. At least this early into the playtest, they'll be able to gauge the strength of response to that.
So one of the first things is that framing that is going to be new for people. And that is that these 3 classes are presented as experts. So people are going to see in this Unearthed Arcana that the 12...
Yeah, I like that framing. I think that's, that is what D&D optimizers would look at those classes and say is the common running thread through them. But people new to the game, they aren't going to see that. They aren't necessarily going to understand, okay, what classes are going to be really good at skills. I mean, potentially they'll pick up on stuff like the rogue as being really good at skills, maybe just put that in the skill monkey category. But they wouldn't necessarily look at the bard and ranger in that way until they are more experienced with the game. So, yeah, I like this. I really, really, really like this.
12 classes of the Player's Handbook, as well as the Artificer, who, while not in the Player's Handbook, gets mentioned in this UA. Each of these classes is now a part of a group in this playtest. The Ranger, the Rogue, and the Bard are part of what's currently called the Expert group. So, hence the name of this Unearthed Arcana, Expert Classes. In future Unearthed Arcanas, you're going to see the other class groups featured, but we wanted to start with the experts. Now, this new concept of class group, new for the current version of the game, is something that has appeared in D&D's history at various times, going all the way back to even the 2nd edition Player's Handbook grouped classes in a similar way. The big question is here, what do these groups mean? The main thing that they do for us is provide a way to deliver groups of classes certain elements of the game collectively. So you're going to see in this very Unearthed Arcana, some of the feats, for instance, have certain class groups as prerequisites. You'll see if...
Okay, I'm not loving the idea of locking feats to particular classes, because I thought the intent of feats were that they were class agnostic, and even if you're talking about a group of classes, that's still an unnecessary prerequisite. I don't like that. I really don't like that.
Feat where it says you maybe need to be a member of the Expert or the Warrior group to take this feat. What that does is it allows us to serve up options to multiple classes simultaneously, and also serve classes like the Artificer that might not be in the same book as the 12 classes that are in the Player's Handbook. Because since we indicate here in this UA that the Artificer counts as an expert, that means anything that members of that group qualify for, the Artificer qualifies for.
Okay, that seems healthy. And actually, they did just mention, for example, a feat might require you to be a warrior or expert, and that sounds like it is excluding particular classes from a feat. And okay, that might be a bit healthier in the case of certain feat combinations with classes being broken. For example, spell casting with getting increases to armor and shields, for example. So, okay, maybe it can work, but I don't know. I'm really not loving it. I'd rather the feats just try to stay reasonably balanced across all classes. Let's keep going.
And if we were ever to make a new class and put it into one of these groups, then suddenly it is able to tap into the shared tech of that group.
Reasonable.
You're going to see this in the next year or so, where you'll see magic items that, rather than having a particular class or a particular feature as a prereq, we'll have one of these groups or multiple groups.
We're seeing a lot of this where they're doing a lot more simplification and classification of things. And yeah, I think these are good quality of life changes. They're doing the same thing with the spell lists. They're doing this now with class groups as well. I think the one danger is, and probably is a bit like the spell lists, is if you do this, you tend to make some of these groupings feel a bit too similar. Let's keep going.
As a prerequisite. You're also going to see that in many cases, while the classes have retained their distinctiveness and their delightful asymmetry, where they work in the ways that are most appropriate for those individual classes, you're going to see more common pieces. So one example of that in this current Unearthed Arcana is all three of the expert classes have the expertise feature. The expertise feature is the signature feature of experts. And so that means even the ranger now has it. The bard and the rogue already had it.
I mean, they tested the ranger having it with the optional features introduced in Tasha's, and it was very, very popular, and it made rangers feel like they should, in that they would be experts in, stealth or exploration and the like, and it was a really good quality of life change for rangers. And yeah, just incorporating expertise into all of these expert classes makes very sound sense.
In the 2014 Player's Handbook, well, now the ranger gets it too, because one of the aspects of the ranger's class fantasy is being the best in a group, particularly at things like survival, stealth, so that the ranger can...
It's funny when you're on the same wavelength as Jeremy Crawford. That's quite entertaining.
Be fantastic at what is iconic for them. And expertise is one of the ways that we do that. Another thing that the experts all have in common is that they are polymaths. They like to have pieces within their classes that are reminiscent of things in other groups. So it is by design that all three of the experts have components within them that are reminiscent of things that you might see in the warrior group, the mage group, the priest group, but here mixed together in a way that is unique to each of the expert classes. Now, we can dive in to each of the classes individually and their subclasses, but that overview, I think, is exciting because it shows that we're not only thinking now of the classes as individuals and also then as a whole family, but then also in these subgroups, and we can leverage these groups in a variety of ways that I think are going to be really fun, not only in terms of the options that we'll be able to give people, but even when it comes to party building. Something we note in this current article is that when you're building a party now, if you want to create sort of a classic balanced D&D party, one way you can do that is make sure you have a member in your group from each of the class groups. Also, something that people are going...
That's an interesting thing to include. Personally, I found so long as groups are essentially picking one person from a different class, usually you still get to that relatively balanced party, but I don't know, it's not a bad idea doing this kind of thing, although I would question why having an expert would make for a balanced party, given that it's such a mishmash of different groupings. Also, you do get into the case where if the rules are recommending particular party structures, that then you get into an awkward place where groups are maybe imposing character choices on other players, particularly experienced players, onto new players, and that maybe feels a little bit bad, and perhaps it's a recommendation that shouldn't be formalized for that reason. At least not without putting in lots of caveats into that to say, hey, players should still get to play what they feel like playing.
going to see in both the Ranger and the Bard in this Unearthed Arcana is a list of suggested prepared spells. One thing that we have seen over the last 8 years very clearly is that sometimes playing a spellcaster can be a little daunting.
Right.
And so what we've done to make it a bit easier to ease into playing a spellcasting class that you've never played before is we provide from level 1 all the way up to level 20 a set of suggested prepared spells for the class.
They say prepared spells. I wonder if that means both Bard and Ranger will be moving to prepared spell lists as opposed to set spell lists. And also whether or not that will mean set spells is going to be a thing going forward, because there was always a bit of a tricky thing when you're doing character building to, if you don't get to change your spells on a long rest, you're locked into those decisions, and mechanically, I mean, it can be quite powerful to be able to change after a long rest, but it does make things a lot easier for new players if they aren't locked into choices.
So again, you're going to see that here in the Bard, you're going to see it in the Ranger, and in future Unearthed Arcanas, when we get to other spellcasting classes, you're going to see it in them as well, where we take some of the most iconic spell options and put them on a list so that, again, whether you're a new player or a veteran who may be just like, I don't feel like making a choice, please, D&D book, tell me.
I think that's great. Yeah, I think any tools that you can give to new players, especially for spell casting, are good. Usually this kind of thing would be handed over to a DM who's experienced with the game to make some recommended spells for a player. But that can feel a little bit bad, like a DM is kind of metagaming or pushing players to go for a particular set of choices. Here, you've got this independent arbiter in the rules book doing it for you, and yeah, I think that's nice.
You can go to that class, look at the suggested list of prepared spells, and just start with that. You still have, of course, the option every time you finish a long rest to change that list, but it gives you a nice starting point.
Almost kind of confirming what I just said, that Bards and Rangers would be able to change the spells on a long rest, which they currently can't. I think Bard can change a spell every time they level up. I think Ranger can do the same as well. Neither of them are prepared spellcasters, so I think that's a good quality of life change. I think removing the other option from the spellcasting player choices makes a lot of sense. Although then it does put into question how wizards would work, given that the way that they currently get their spells is through a spell book. We'll have to see.
So that you maybe don't have to do quite as much homework when you decide to dive into a spellcasting class that's new for you.
So ritual spellcasting has changed, or rather people have more access to it now?
Yes, so one of the many goodies in the rules glossary is the simple but important note that we are playtesting currently, that basically if you can cast a spell and it has the ritual tag, you have the option of casting it as a ritual.
Good. Yeah, that's really good. I think that is very healthy for the game. I think it just makes a lot of sense that if you can cast a spell, then you can take time to cast the spell. I wonder if they will change any other rules about that, though.
In the past, a character had to have a feature that specifically unlocked rituals for them, and we've decided to experiment instead with just the ability of, again, if you can cast the spell and it has the ritual tag, you have the option of casting it as a ritual, and just have that turned on for spellcasters of all sorts.
And all the classes eventually get, we didn't touch upon this, also can get access to epic feats or epic boons.
That is right. Now, every class, what was previously their 20th level feature, they now get at 18th level. And instead, now at 20th level, those epic boons that are in the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide, you now get one when you hit 20th level. Now,
interesting. Okay. That will essentially level the playing field between all the classes in terms of that 20th level feature. I think the the one class that tended to have really good 20th level features was Paladin, with their various oath features. Okay. I guess that means that the subclass feature... No, I don't think that impacts subclasses. I think it just changes what the core classes are getting at 18th level. Okay.
We have a suggested one for each class, but when you hit 20th level, you now get to pick. And those epic boons have been reimagined as feats, and many of them are also available in this Unearthed Arcana.
Also, if that is a 20th level feat, maybe that's something you can get even when you multi-class between different classes. And okay, that's the end of the video. One last thought I had with regards to these groupings of classes, and that's what happens when you multi-class. Do you get this tag that you're an expert and a martial class and a spellcaster class if you pick up class levels in each of those? Or is it the fact that if you pick a expert class as your original class, then a bit like your saving throw proficiencies, then you are kind of locked into that classification going forward, and then kind of locked out of taking certain feats as you level up? Not necessarily a bad thing. I'm hoping multi-classing rules are clarified as we get into future stuff, because it's such a popular mechanic in the game. It's almost, I know there's an optional feature, but I feel like people will be very upset if that wasn't a option going forward. So let's see how that pans out. And that is the end of the video. This turned out to be a bit longer than I was expecting. Thank you for joining me this morning, wherever you are in the world, and I am very, very hopeful and excited for this next playtest document. I can't wait to get into the real nitty-gritty of everything in that and present to all of you my thoughts. And before I go, I've had some really good responses on a few previous videos. Please subscribe, like, comment, and everything. I really want to be able, particularly to hit 1,000 subscribers with this channel, just so I can start communicating with you all a bit more through putting up channel polls and the like. So anything you can do with that, it goes a long way to growing this channel and this community, and I really appreciate you all for it. Alright, that is it from me now. Right, goodbye.